Hey there, I'm Stephen Kesting, and this is the Strenuous Life Podcast. Right. Here's something that I've talked about in my email newsletter already, but it's so important that I thought I should talk about it on the podcast as well. Because I had a really close call the other day. I almost destroyed somebody's knee and a friend of mine's knee. This would have been bad. So this isn't a rant against leg locks. In general, it's a rant about training safety. So what happened? I was rolling with a guy, and I am undeniably bigger than him by about 20 odd pounds. And I'm undeniably more experienced in the jiu-jitsu and the Brazilian jiu-jitsu on the ground grappling, that aspect. So what do you do when you're training with somebody who's lighter than you and not as experienced as you? Yes, you could just completely crush them and feed your own ego, but it's usually better to pick an aspect of your game, to only work one kind of guard sweep, to only work the baiting guard sweep from spider guard, to only work the X-pass against open guard, to only work the armbar. In my case, I was hyper-focusing on a couple of positions, Ashi Garami, which is the sort of the standard leg lock position, and trying to transition into the 411 leg lock position. And when you hyper-focus like that, regardless of what technique or what throw or what sweep or what guard pass or what escape you're doing, even people who are not as big as you and not as experienced as you very quickly learn what your moves are and learn to respond against you more effectively. So instead of fighting, say, a blue belt, you're fighting a purple belt, just in that one area. So that's a really good way of setting yourself up to have a more productive sparring session when there's a big discrepancy. So that's exactly what I was doing, focusing on the leg lock game and then kind of finishing with a heel hook as an afterthought. The main focus was on the position, not on the heel hook. So we were rolling, and he's trying a few things and I'm doing a few things, and I'm using this essentially as batting practice to get into the standard Ashi and then to try and transition into the 411. So at one point, I tapped him out a few times. Had him in standard Ashi, and for whatever reason, I decided to finish from there. It just felt right. So I dug my wrist bone underneath his heel, right? This is just before you clamp your hands together and do the various movements that apply the braking mechanics. And as I'm watching him, I'm expecting him to spin out. There's kind of a right and a wrong direction to spin when you're caught in a heel hook. Just spinning by itself isn't going to get you out of a good leg lock, but it relieves the pressure a little bit. But there's definitely a wrong way to spin, and that's the one that brings the pressure on of the heel hook really fast. It'd be kind of like getting your foot caught in a gopher hole and then deciding that the way to get out of this gopher hole is to turn around and pirouette as hard as you possibly can. Of course, that's going to rip your knee and your ankle all to pieces. And that's what my friend almost did. He started spinning hard because, he's an experienced martial artist and didn't want to get caught. Hard the wrong way. Basically, he was spinning towards his trapped heel, which would have meant, it would have been the equivalent of me slamming on the heel hook, the old school heel hook, the more of the twisting heel hook that attacks the knee, rather than the more modern heel hook, which attacks more the ankle, a little bit less the knee. Anyhow, it would have applied an old school heel hook at full power to his leg, and it would have taken a while for his body momentum to slow down. So it would have also been a no-tap situation where just tapping doesn't relieve the pressure because his body would still have to catch up. It would have been disastrous. It would have been terrible. He probably would have needed surgery. We're talking ACL. We're talking, the little ligaments, the connective tissue in the knee, possibly in the ankle. We're talking cartilage. Basically, it's not good. Very, very luckily, I saw it coming and I let go of it. And then, we had a little chat and I explained to him, man, when you're caught in a heel hook, don't spin the wrong way. This is, let's feel this. This is the direction that I'm trying to apply it at. This is the direction that you're spinning in. You see how that brings it on, right? Like a slow teaching by feeling, right? I think it's Carlos Machado, who said, in jiu-jitsu, seeing is not believing, feeling is believing. So I was trying to show him feeling by believing about spinning the wrong way in a very, very safe manner. So, like I said, I don't want to make leg locks the enemy here, because the exact same thing could happen with a triangle choke. The exact same thing could happen with, trying to defend a guard sweep. Imagine if you have somebody in the closed guard and they are pretty strong and they can't break your closed guard, but they've got some crazy idea for whatever reason, and that's to stand up, run across the room, and then do a flying belly flop off to the side of your leg. Is somebody going to get hurt? Probably. Might be you, might be him, but somebody's going to get hurt. Or you have people doing crazy dynamic movements, trying to stop a sweep, trying to get out of a position, although the getting out of a position is less dangerous because it's harder for them to develop that much momentum. Usually these kind of mistakes happen when people are on top or are caught in a submission that doesn't really compromise their base. They twist wildly one way, they twist wildly the other. So the first lesson here is, if you're caught and you don't know what to do, then do not do something dynamic. If you're caught and you don't know what to do, then whatever you do, don't do something that's dynamic. There's just way too much momentum that you can develop that will severely injure you if something gets caught somewhere. All right, if I've got you in an arm bar and you do some kind of crazy cartwheeling escape, yeah, it might work. There are correct ways to cartwheel out of an arm bar. But let's say you get it wrong, or let's say I don't see what you're doing and shift my hips, or let's say I do see what you're doing, but I can't let go in time, or your arm is caught between my legs and you jump the wrong way, and somebody's going to get hurt, and in that case it's probably going to be you. Just like you wouldn't if you're walking across the prairie and your foot got caught in a gopher hole. Your first move wouldn't be to do something dynamic and spinning. You would look at your foot and try and figure out what you're going to do next. So the worst that you're going to do is tap out. It's jiu-jitsu, so tap out. If it's a sweep, concede the sweep. Go to the bottom. Don't try and do a super crazy head spring off the mat and try and scramble back. There are times, of course, that dynamic movements are totally valid counters. If you look at wrestling, there's a ton of, usually very light wrestlers doing crazy back handspring movements out of a single leg takedown, right? They get caught in a single leg takedown and they launch themselves backwards and they rip their leg out, and then they go in for their low single or whatever it is. This is not the first time that they've ever practiced it. They have practiced this in practice many, many times. It's a dynamic, albeit risky, correct movement. But imagine what would happen if you've never done this movement before, you've never done a back handspring before, and I get you in a single leg and I've got a really tight grip on your calf and your ankle. I've got a really tight grip. All right, you're going to do a jumping, flipping back handspring. Go. Do you think something's going to go wrong? Of course, something's going to go wrong. So if you don't know what to do, don't do something dynamic. In jiu-jitsu, the answer is easy. Just tap. The trick really is avoiding injury and not making physiotherapists and orthopedic surgeons any richer than they already are. So I've been focusing on what my friend should have done or not done. But I am also to blame, because we were playing with a position and then kind of adding on the technique or the finishing technique of the heel hook. We're playing with a couple of leg lock positions. So my assumption was, because of his martial arts background in other areas, that he had an understanding of the do's and don'ts of leg locking, especially the heel hooking aspect of the game. 100% my bad. 100% my fault. I should not have made this assumption. There was an old joke that I learned back, I think, in my undergrad. The word assume makes an ass out of you and me. And, somebody would have suffered, likely would have been him, but I shouldn't have made that assumption. So when you're working with beginners, or when you're working with somebody who's new to an area. Say you've got an experienced purple belt and you're going to do some judo throws because you've got more of a judo background than he does. Don't assume that the guy knows how to fall. Don't assume that the guy knows not to reach his arm out to try and break his fall with one hand. Don't assume that the guy's not going to bridge. So go over basic break falling first. Even though the guy's an experienced jiu-jitsu guy, things that work in the low kinetic energy situation of the ground, typically low kinetic energy, stop working when you're flipping a guy over your head in Ippon Seonage. So it's really important to teach beginners and people who are not experienced in whatever area that you're working on the basic parameters of safety. I saw this once. I saw some guy come into a martial arts class and talk about the various martial arts he'd done. I mean, this guy sounded like he was super well trained and super well experienced in all areas and all ranges of combat. And so they started comparing, him and the teacher started comparing techniques. And the teacher was showing him a basic technique, and he didn't sucker the guy. He did his basic punch counter, grabbed the guy, did a osorogari, the basic outside tripping throw. And the way this guy fell, it was 100% obvious he'd never done a single break fall or been on the receiving end of a single throw. He basically landed on his head, almost knocked himself out after talking a really big story just moments before. You can't make that assumption. No matter how much research they seem to have done, assume that people you don't know anything, and assume that people who do know stuff might not understand what it is that you're working on. So that's the second lesson. If you're going to be working something, it's your job to explain the dangers of a technique and to teach them the right counters. Hey, in general, when I have a heel hook, turn in the direction of the pressure. Here's my hand, here's the heel. If it's here, you're going to be turning that way. And it's pretty easy to convey. At least that way, if they do the wrong thing, you'll feel a little bit better. Lesson 3. Expect people to do stupid things without warning and for no reason. There are all kinds of crazy things that people do on the mat. This can range from inexperienced people trying weird, spastic, high energy things that make no sense in the grappling context to the experienced grappler. This is one of the reasons that people talk about how dangerous it is to roll or spar with a beginner, because they do things that make no sense. They do things that aren't going to work, but could well injure them or you, right? I mean, if some beginner is there and he crouches down, steps to the left, steps to the right, and then jumps across the room with a big flying right cross, he might land that once. He's not going to land that a second time, because as soon as people go, oh my God, that's what this guy's about? All right, well, let's shut that down. It's never going to work a second time. But it's unorthodox enough and it's dynamic enough and it'll probably delivered with 100% commitment that it's dangerous. So you have to protect yourself at all times. And because it's jiu-jitsu, and because the single most important piece of training equipment you have in jiu-jitsu is your training partner, you also have to protect your training partner at all times. So you got to be on the lookout for things going wrong, not only with yourself, not only with your partner, but also 2 people over. If you're doing stand-up training and you're getting ready for a tournament and you decide that you're going to dust off your 2 or 3 judo throws or your 2 or 3 wrestling takedowns and drill them, are you doing this on a crowded mat with a ton of people on the ground? If you take a look at my face carefully in one of my videos, you'll notice that one of my eyes is lower down in my head than the other eye. So one eye is lower than the other. That eye is lower because once upon a time, Stefan was teaching somebody how to break fall on the mats. And we were going left break fall, right break fall, left break fall. We were down. Beside me, a friend of mine was teaching somebody else, a little bit more experienced, how to break fall. So he was actually hip tossing them. Unfortunately, he hip tossed his guy so that his heel whipped through the air in a big 270-degree arc, I think it was, must have been, and landed flush in my eye. So that was an orbital bone fracture. Took a while, seeing double for quite a while. There were some problems, got resolved, and it ruined my my natural good looks. So much for my career, my modeling career. But that was actually a failure of looking out for your training partners that you're actually with and your other potential training partners on the mat. If you're going against a new guy, watch out for that flailing. It might seem totally reasonable to them to start Thai kicking your head as you're passing the guard because they've trained Thai boxing before, or they've watched too much MMA. They don't know that that's not in the culture of the club. It may not be their fault. It may just be how they're wired. There may be something wrong with them. It may have been the culture of the previous club. You can't assume that people are going to do the right thing. Expect people to do stupid things without warning for no reason. So, protect yourself at all times and protect your training partner at all times. Injury is the enemy. That's what's really going to slow you down. Once upon a time, I've said this before, once upon a time, there was a guy as technically gifted as Rafa Mendes, as athletically gifted as Marcelo Garcia, as strong and as relentless and mentally driven as Rickson Gracie. And he was tearing a swath through everybody. And everybody knew he was going to be the next world champion. But then he got injured and he stopped training. And you never heard of him ever again. Don't be that guy. You're in it for the long run. Tortoise in the hare. We are the tortoises. So, good luck with your tortoise-like progression through the art of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Podcast listeners, if you're listening, there's a good chance that you're into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I hope that you are. It's the best martial art out there. But nevertheless, if you do Jiu-Jitsu, if you do grappling, if you do MMA, I've got a book out there. It's called A Roadmap to BJJ. And it covers the fundamentals of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It covers the techniques and the positions. It's got checklists. It's a super useful resource, and it's completely free. If you go to grapplearts.com/book, you can download it. It's also on Amazon Kindle where you can buy it if you want to go that way. But I'm going to suggest the free route, which is grapplearts.com/book. Check it out. I get feedback almost every day from people who found this super useful in finally getting through and understanding the ground game, and it finally making sense for them, and it finally not being so intimidating anymore. Check it out. I think you'll find it really useful too.